Imagine yourself adorned in rich fabrics, your hair scented with rose oil, every gesture, every word carefully rehearsed to exude royal grace. Today you stand before the monarch, your family's ultimate hope, their precious gamble, their key to elevation. You are paraded for the court's inspection, a priceless gem silently vying with others just like you. But the king's gaze passes over you, never to return. By dusk, your name isn't among those selected for marriage or favor. You're not even granted the courtesy of a dignified dismissal. Instead, you are seized by the king's men, exploited, passed from hand to hand, then cast aside. Because in the unforgiving machinery of medieval court politics, a woman rejected by the sovereign isn't simply free, she becomes fair game. This is the chilling chronicle of those women, silenced by history, scrubbed from official records, yet whose truth remains. This is what unfolded when the king's choice bypassed her. Within the opulent halls of medieval courts, beneath the veneer of arranged unions and strategic alliances, lay a brutal undercurrent. Annually, sometimes more often, lords and nobles from across kingdoms dispatched their daughters to royal courts. The aspiration to secure royal favor, or ideally a marriage to the king. For these young women, the stakes were unimaginably high. A royal marriage promised power, protection, and a lasting legacy. Yet for every girl the king favored, many more were spurned. And these rejected women, they didn't simply return home. Some were forbidden to. Some no longer had a home to go back to. What transpired next was no romantic verse. It was stark horror. Let me recount the story of Eleanor of Varrow Hill. When she arrived at King Aldrich's court, her family had exhausted their last coin on her preparation. Custom gowns, language tutors, etiquette lessons. Her father even borrowed from a baron to ensure her journey included a fine white horse, knowing presentation was crucial. Eleanor wasn't merely beautiful, she was brilliant. She read Latin, debated theology, and played the harp exquisitely. Her family believed, no, they knew she would be chosen. But King Aldrich selected Lady Iseldra, the daughter of a wealthier duke. The instant Iseldra curtsied, the king's eyes lit up. Eleanor was superfluous. She was left in the guest wing. On the third night, a drunken soldier forced his way into her chamber, then another and another. She screamed, she fought, but no one came to her aid. In the castle's cold calculus, she had fulfilled her initial purpose. She was no longer of noble utility, she was merely possession. This wasn't an isolated incident for Eleanor, it was systematic. Kings were revered as divine figures, and their soldiers were predatory beasts draped in authority. In the absence of true justice, loyalty was a transaction, and women were the spoils. It was an unspoken, grim convention in many courts. Discarded maidens were deemed property of the court. Some were sold to settle their father's debts. Others were sequestered in hidden quarters, compelled to entertain soldiers or guests in exchange for basic sustenance. They weren't dead, but many would argue death might have been a release. Imagine applying for a distinguished position, and after the interview you're informed you're not suitable. Acceptable, right? But then, instead of being allowed to depart, you're imprisoned within the building. The caretaker assaults you, the guards leer, and you are never permitted to leave. That's what it was like, only far more grim, for the caretaker wielded a blade, the guards were inebriated, and there were no escape routes. Adelina's narrative was even darker. From the western marshes, daughter of a minor lord, she wasn't truly expected to catch the king's eye. She was too unassuming, too reserved. Yet her father clung to the belief that her obedience and untouched purity would make her appealing. She endured only days at court. After the king's steward publicly ridiculed her for stuttering at dinner, her father was disgraced. The next morning he returned home without her. Adelina was relegated to the castle kitchens, washing dishes and scrubbing floors. The guards taunted her, calling her king's leftovers. At night they came. One day she resisted. They shattered her fingers. By the time she turned 12, She was sold to a mercenary company heading east. No surname, no legal standing, merely human cargo. In the medieval world, a woman's worth was inextricably linked to her chastity, beauty, and connections. A woman rejected by the king was considered sullied. In the eyes of common soldiers, she was like spoiled wine, ready for consumption, but no longer sacred. No laws protected these women. The clergy averted their gaze, nobles turned their backs, and those who dared to cry out were branded as insane, demon-possessed, or ungrateful. There's a poignant entry in a faded abbey scroll about a girl named Marianne, who, in her own blood, scratched on her chamber wall. He looked at me once and forgot, but they never stopped looking. Elena was eventually discovered, half-starved and bruised, wandering the roads outside the castle, clad in a soldier's tattered cloak. A nun offered her refuge. For years, she uttered no sound. But when her voice finally returned, her first words were, "I wasn't chosen, but I was taken." She spent the rest of her life in the convent, tending to other abused women, never again speaking of the king. Across France, England, and the Holy Roman Empire, similar patterns emerged. Eleanor of Blair recorded in her letters that maids who displease the Duke are fed to the wolves that wear his banner. A Roman chronicler observed, "When Emperor Frederick passed over a maiden, the garrison rejoiced, for it meant fresh sport." It was never about affection, never about merit. It was about raw power. And when power discards you, it doesn't leave you in peace, it leaves you vulnerable. We've discussed the horrors within the courts, but what of those who survived, who escaped, who defied? Did any of them rise again? She wasn't chosen, but she survived. That was the quiet truth of so many forgotten women in medieval courts. Discarded like broken figurines, they learned to mend themselves. Not all found escape, not all endured, but those who did carried a hidden fire beneath their silence. Let's return to Eleanor, the girl from Varrow Hill, spurned by King Aldrich and brutalized by his soldiers. What became of her after the convent? The historical records are hazy. Some accounts suggest she remained with the nuns, spending her days cultivating lavender and comforting other broken women. But alternative tales, whispered among midwives and women of the forest, tell a different story. One legend claims Elena vanished from the convent one night, only to be seen years later as a shadowy figure who aided in the abduction and punishment of knights notorious for abusing women. They say she memorized the guards' patrol routes. They say she silenced a man who mocked a woman's cries. They say the king's crest was found burned into the wood outside a soldier's barracks one morning, beside a solitary woman's shoe. Was it mere myth? Perhaps. But myths often encapsulate truths too terrifying for the written word. Now consider a very real woman, Iselda of Breton. She was publicly rejected by Prince Harland during a lavish feast. He cruelly called her common-faced. Her father died of shame 2 weeks later. With no family or dowry, Iselda was retained in the castle, not in the Great Hall, but in the laundry quarters. And there, the soldiers found her, passing her among them like rations for years. She had no voice, no identity, just endless chores. Until one day, a fire erupted in the barracks, incinerating several men. No one suspected her, but when the captain of the guard confronted her, she didn't deny it. She looked him directly in the eye and stated, "I didn't like it, but I prayed for it every single night." She was executed days later, her grave unmarked. Yet the chambermaids carved her name onto a soapstone, secreted behind the laundry shed. That soapstone is still there today, weathered but legible. Iselda. She didn't merely suffer, she left a wound. Imagine this. Born into destitution, your father sacrifices his meager possessions to secure your presence at the palace. You consider yourself fortunate to be among the maidens presented to the king, and when he bypasses you, your penalty is to be exploited by the very guards sworn to protect the kingdom. This was the plight of Mira, a girl from the fringes of the northern nobility. No title, just a desperate chance for advancement. She was soft-spoken, skilled in embroidery, and sang hymns with the clarity of a bell. But after the court season concluded, Mira was not chosen. Her father was denied an audience to reclaim her, so the guards seized her instead. But Mira possessed something they underestimated: memory. She meticulously recalled every insult, every face, every whispered word in the darkness. Over time, she began to commit it all to writing: names, dates, rooms. She escaped during a midsummer festival when the guards were drunk, disguised as a washerwoman. She fled to a monastery that welcomed women to transcribe texts. Years later, an anonymous manuscript surfaced, detailing the abuses of King Edri's men, their crimes, their victims, their sins. It ignited an uproar. No one knew the author, but the final page bore a chilling inscription: "I was not chosen, but I was not forgotten." The reverberations of these women didn't perish in the chambers where they were violated. They travelled in whispers, in warnings, in acts of quiet rebellion. There were instances where women united. In one southern kingdom, the daughters of 5 rejected maidens formed a clandestine sisterhood. They offered sanctuary to any girl spurned by the court and scarred by abuse. They called themselves the Veil. When soldiers attempted to invade their forest sanctuary, they were found disarmed, bound to trees, with defiant words scrolled across their chests. "We are not yours." They didn't wield swords. They fought with solidarity, secrecy, and silence. In the medieval world, where women were largely voiceless, silence became a terrifying weapon. But not every story culminates in open rebellion. Some conclude in quiet acts of defiance. There was Elaine, a rejected maiden given to a high-ranking general after failing to impress the Duke. For years she was his chattel. She bore him 2 children, both torn from her. She endured frigid nights, cruel words, and ceaseless control. Yet every winter, she would walk barefoot into the snow, carrying food to the poorest women in town, others who had been rejected, abandoned, or exploited. She taught them how to sew, how to brew healing teas, how to simply survive. Elaine didn't brandish a sword, she nurtured a generation. Now here's the difficult truth. Not all rejected women had the opportunity to resist. Many perished unnamed, without graves, without remembrance. They were statistics before statistics even existed. But even silence carries weight. Even forgotten stories tug at the conscience of time. Because for every king who turned away, a soldier leered. And for every girl who dreamed of love, there was a night that spiraled into a nightmare. It's easy to romanticize medieval court life, the castles, the gowns, the feasts. But the grim reality was that the court was a brutal battlefield, and the rejected women were its silent casualties. They were not chosen, and so they were taken. But some became something else entirely. The spectral figures that haunted soldiers' dreams, the women who left indelible traces in ruins, the names etched in forgotten places. Let's reflect on their legacy. The kings are enshrined in memory, their names carved in stone, their victories extolled by bards. But the women, their stories were systematically erased, whitewashed, buried beneath dismissive labels like unworthy, unfit, unclaimed. And yet here we are centuries later still uttering their names. Elena, Iselda, Mira, Elaine. They were meant to vanish, but history possesses a peculiar way of seeping through the cracks. So what profound lessons do we draw from this? We learn that power, when left unchecked, will always find someone to devour. That women, even when stripped of their status, are never truly stripped of their spirit. And that rejection, when coupled with abuse, is not a failure on their part. It is a crime committed against them. These women did not fail the kings. The kings failed them. The soldiers betrayed them. The world abandoned them. But they, through agonizing pain, through whispered truths, through quiet acts of rebellion, survived. They survived in scars, in daughters, in secret scripts, and in silent prayers. This isn't merely a medieval tale. This is a timeless human story about the consequences when power is deified and compassion is utterly lost. So, the next time someone speaks of medieval courtly life and the splendor of royal romance, remember the others, the girls not chosen, the girls taken, the girls who never had the power to choose at all. Their stories matter because if we don't remember them, who will?